Hey guys, so we're gonna have a little chat about oil cooler gaskets. This is a question that I get, I wouldn't say super frequently, or a lot, or super, I don't get it a lot, but we're gonna talk about oil cooler gaskets and oil coolers a little bit. 12 valves, this is 12 valve only. I'll do common rail. Those ones are pretty straightforward, but I do get this question and I have answered this question before. Now, what I want to talk about here is there's two different, when you guys get an engine gasket set or you get a oil cooler, they are going to come with two gaskets. Well, it comes with three gaskets. It comes with the gasket that goes back here, but there's only one of those, so you don't need to worry about that. Now, easiest way to do it is, so this is for a storm block or an Encore block, depending on dual oil drain block, a metric block, whatever you want to call it. The easiest way to tell is by the window. There is obviously, like, there's a window here and a window here, but that's not the only difference. Now, if you put these two gaskets on top of each other, that oil port is covered over on this one. So 97 to 2002, this is the oil cooler gasket that you want to use. Pre-97, so 89 to 96, this is the gasket you want to use. But not, you could always use this gasket on those ones. There is some that you can flop back and forth as far as that goes. But that's the easiest way for me to explain it. So, like I said, storm block, if it has two oil drains, you want to use this gasket. So 97 12 valve to 02 24 valve. And then 89 to 96 12 valve. Now, the big difference, basically the big difference is this oil hole right here. Now, the reason for that is this actually, when the system dumps its oil pressure off, depending if you have an old style cooler, because all the new style coolers are going to be blocked here anyway. You can see that blocked right here. And that's where that extra hole lines up, is right there. So basically what this hole allows it to do originally is this will dump the excess oil pressure back to the oil pump. And I'll show you a picture here in a second. Anyways, I did a little bit of explaining on the holes and where the passages go there. But anyways, so this one is going to go back to the oil pump. This one dumps back to block. So if you have it set up so that the system on this truck, and it has the hole here, you want to have this lined up. Now, if you're using one of these gaskets, it honestly doesn't really matter because the ports are still lined up. But the easiest way to do it is just, like I said, storm block, non-storm block. But, and that's especially if you're using it. Now, if you're taking the oil cooler off, I recommend always to change the oil cooler. Always, always, always. You rebuild the engine, put a new oil cooler in it. Especially if you had an engine failure. I personally, I always put a new oil cooler. I don't reuse them because they do load up with stuff inside, you know, just from being used, and then they get crusty in here, right? And then now also something to do with oil coolers. So the one on the right-hand side, let me straighten this up here. Realized we were so crooked. The one on the right-hand side obviously is a 5 plate, and then the one on the other side is a 7 plate. I always run the bigger oil cooler. The bigger the oil cooler, the better, in my opinion. Keep the oil cooler. The more you can keep it cool, the more heat you can put into the system. But that's the easiest way to explain that for you guys that are wondering. So if you're doing a rebuild, like I said, Encore, so it has two oil drains in the block, and it's a 12 valve or VP44 engine. This one, non, is this one. So anyways, that's all I have on this one, guys. It's pretty straightforward for you guys that wanted to know. But actually, I guess maybe I should explain that a little bit. So, I guess I probably already would have. Anyways, that's all there is to this one. Like, subscribe, hit me down in the comments, and we'll catch you on the next one. Thanks, guys. Hey, guys. So I wanted to have a little chat about oil coolers and oil cooler gaskets for 12 valve. So I got a couple sitting here on the bench. Now, what I wanted to explain as far as oil coolers go, so if you look at this one is a 5-plate oil cooler, and this one, this is the same oil cooler, but this one's a 7-plate oil cooler. These ones were usually used in 4B stuff, but I have seen them in like 12 valves. And I think maybe some of the non-intercooled stuff had a different plate in it too. But nonetheless, I just wanted to mention, if you guys are putting an oil cooler, make sure you put the big oil cooler in it, more oil cooler. Technically, the more power you can make, and you can help keep the oil temperature down. So that's all there is to talk about that. Pretty simple as far as that goes. Now, oh, actually, I shouldn't say that. So if you have an oil cooler and you're changing, let's say you have a gasket that's leaking or something, I personally throw them away, put a new one in. They're not horribly expensive. But if you do not swap from block to block if you are doing that, unless you have the right cooler. So if you look at this one, see how there's the gasket, there's no hole there. But if this oil cooler has a hole in it, you want to make sure that you're putting the right oil cooler with the right gasket and right on the right block. You're not going to find too many that have that hole there, because it's kind of an inundated design. So basically that hole, what it does is when it overpressures the system, instead of it dumping it back to the sump, it's going to dump it back to the oil pump, which I'm personally not a huge fan of because it floods the oil pump. And you can get aeration and blah, blah, blah. So anyways, I don't personally like that style, but you won't see very many of them. Like old stuff or something that's never had a cooler change. But if you're doing it, I would recommend always changing the oil cooler. So the oil cooler would look just like this one, doing it on a 12 valve. So there's basically the oil, when it dumps off from relief, dumps right back into the back of the oil pan, or back into the oil pan. Now, gasket wise, this is a question that I do get. So I thought I'd do a little video on it. This gasket, this one, the one on the right, is for a dual oil drain block. Now, a storm block, an in-core block, depending on what you want to call it. So 97, your 97 to 2002 VP44, and anything 12 valve that has a dual oil drain block, so 97, 98, 12 valves, you're going to want to use this gasket. And the easiest way to tell is there's a window in this one, and there is not a window in this one. Now, if you're talking older engines, you're 89 to 96, this is the gasket that you want to use. The easiest, technically you can use this gasket on a VP44 engine with the right cooler and blah, blah, blah. But just easy to do it. Use this on the 97 and a half or 97 and up. Use this on 96 and down. Just simple. Keep it simple. So that's all there really is to talk about that part of it. I do want to go over to the blocks and just show you a couple little things on the blocks and the reason for it, and the ways how you can identify what I'm talking about. So we'll go over to the block right now. We'll go two different blocks. So I have one, the early one, sitting here on a cart customer's engine. Now, let me get some light on the subject here. Maybe get that to sit there would be cool, because then I could point at stuff. So this is the part that's different. Now, if you look here, this one is going to be your oil in. It goes in through the cooler, back out of the cooler, through the oil filter, comes back, and then goes into the engine. So then that's when it oils everything off. Now, whatever it bypasses off on this style of block, it's going to bypass into here, which goes back into the oil pan. Now, if you go over to a storm block, depending on the design of the oil cooler that you're running, that's right. Like I said, if you're taking the oil cooler out, you should be putting a new oil cooler in anyway. Now, this one is a storm block. And as you can see, it's similar, so that your oil in does the loop around, oils the engine. Now, the relief can dump into here, which goes back into sump, which they call dump to sump. And then, or it can dump into the back into the oil pump, which basically right here will dump back into the oil pump. Now, the reason that I say that if you have the oil cooler that's set up for it, this hole is going to be plugged off. Not always, but this hole is usually going to be plugged off, and this one won't be. So you need to have the right gasket. Now, if you're putting, like I said, if you're doing a new oil cooler, this, I haven't seen one in a long time, a new one, this hole is going to be plugged off on it. It's just going to look like the early 12 valve. So just the easiest way to explain it, as long as you have, as long as you use the one oil or the one gasket for the storm block and the other gasket for the other one, you don't ever have to worry about screwing up gaskets. But you do want to make sure that you have the right oil cooler. So you want to make sure that your oil cooler has a hole here. If it's a 12 valve, early 12 valve, so 90, no, sorry. If it's the early 12 valve, you want to make sure you have a hole in your oil cooler here and not here. Because if you do, you'll have problems. So, but anyways, if you're buying a new cooler, not swapping coolers, you won't have to worry about, because you can't buy that old style one anymore that I know of anyway. And then there was, I think there was another design too off the top of my head. I can't remember. But anyways, nonetheless, that's just a kind of a short tutorial, I guess, per se. Actually, maybe I should show you, now that I say that, for you guys that are still watching, not that we're too long on the video anyway, but for you guys that are still watching, I will. So this is something that I recommend doing too. I did it in the rebuild video, because I always do it too. You want to pull this pressure relief. Let's see if I can get this thing to sit up. Oh yeah. So you want to take this pressure relief out and make sure it slides up and down nice. I put a new spring in them 99% of the time. My stuff, sometimes I don't, I'll just shim it. But then there's also your bypass valve, which goes right here, which obviously there's not one in here for some reason. I'm not sure why there isn't one in there, but there's no bypass valve in there, which is basically just a valve with a spring on it. But now what happens is if the pressure gets too high, the differential pressure between the filtered and unfiltered side of your oil your oil filter, like let's say it's really cold out or something, or the filter's plugged, basically what it is if this valve opens and then dumps it off. It dumps it back into the oiling system, but it dumps it non-filtered. So that's what you want to watch. And that's the reason that I always change that, because if the spring gets weak in it, because it does sit like at wide open throttle or hard pulls or that type of high RPM, this valve does lay open a bit, just because it can't deal with all the oil flow. The filter can't deal with all the oil flow. So it does open up, so it does wear out. So you want to make sure that you change that. If you have this off, I recommend always putting a new oil filter or a new oil cooler, taking this apart, making sure that it moves properly, and then replacing the oil bypass or filter bypass technically. But anyways, not a real long one, I don't think. Now we're under 9 minutes. Like, subscribe, hit me down in the comments. I appreciate the support. Thanks to my Patreons, and keep watching. Catch you on the next one.